and our student at Sarah Lawrence. And he has taught for us both at the Hudson Valley Writers Center and on Zoom. The last time he read for us, he filmed a testimonial about why he feels the Writers Center is an important institution for its emphasis on community building and free access to readings like this one tonight. We are so grateful to Dennis for his support over the years as we celebrate the publication of his new and selected poems out right now. Michael and Mihaela are new to the Hudson Valley Writers Reading Series, but they were both on the faculty of Drew. That program has meant a lot to the Hudson Valley Writers Center over the years. Its director, Sean Nevin, was discovered by Margot Taft-Stever for the Slappering Hall Press Chapbook Contest. And Drew's faculty members, Sarah Vapp, Alicia Orsticker, Afa M. Weaver, have all taught courses at the center, helping to expand our community. So we are so thrilled to be able to welcome Michael and Mihaela here tonight to share their wonderful new work with us. Mihaela Moscaliuc is the author of Cemetery, Inc. from University of Pittsburgh Press in 2021, as well as 2 previous collections. She is the translator of 2 collections, including Liliana Ursu's Clay and Star. She edited Insane Devotion on the writing of Gerald Stern, and she co-edited with Michael Waters' Borderlines, Poems of Migration from Knopf in 2020. She is the translation editor for Plume and has received 2 awards from Prairie Schooner, residency fellowships from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, MacDowell Colony, New Jersey State Council on the Arts, and a Fulbright Fellowship to Romania. She is Associate Professor of English at Monmouth University and former poetry and translation mentor in the low residency MFA program at Drew. In Poems of Compassion and Social Justice, she probes borders and memory to work through and further complicate understandings of belonging from places including her native Romania and histories to ways of knowing, loving, and grieving. Brooklyn Rail writes, objective, authentic, and ultimately vulnerable without affect or strain, an intensity found only in the greatest poems. Please help me welcome Mihaela Moscaliuc.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you, Sophia and Paula, and it's such a great honor to read with Dennis and with Michael. I'm really nervous. I see so many friends and former students and relatives, Matusha Lala in Romania, in the audience. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm sorry that we're not in person this time, but hopefully you'll have us back in person. I'm going to start with a poem dedicated to my father. It was his birthday yesterday. I'm a photographer's daughter, and all I need to mention is that the poem was written during the pandemic, and the canon in the poem is the camera. Erotic. Asked what he found erotic, he said, eyes. Not eyes per se, but how they instigate, ignite the body from within. That 2-second ocular tryst that no tangible can match when the strange eyes that enter yours, equally strange, let you in. I felt envious. I'd never dared other eyes, and when lanced with a suggestive glance, made sure to avert mine. Until now, when the daily stroll parallel to the beach is measured not in miles, but eyes. Behind the mask, breath reveals its nature, and it stinks. The iris is the sole internal organ visible from the outside, My father professed to justify his cannon's small invasions on the streets of Manhattan. I walk the day to harvest what I see. Blots of color, fear, hello, no. Father's camera on continuous click, 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 stealing what the subjects don't know they can give. And this next poem from Cemetery Ink as well is for my daughter, Kiernan. And it was inspired, actually, it's a love poem for my daughter, my stepdaughter Kiernan, but it was inspired by a book called The Mosquito, A Human History of Our Deadliest Predator by Timothy Weingard. Mosquito. She will absorb blood 3 times her body weight, then land on the nearest post to extract and evacuate its water. Limber enough now for flight, she will rush to the nearest post. She will rush the cold pressed juice to nourish her eggs. Forget the origin of blood. Focus on the mother, the serrated blades and syringes working concertedly like a team of eminent surgeons. Then the throb of panic when she senses she won't make it home. Intense labor and devotion undone with a casual swat. When I took you to pick a dress, but wouldn't buy you accessories for the wedding, your dad's and mine, you blurted, "You're not even my mother." You were a child and I'd just stopped being one. Vacuumed, I'd reemerged as mother without child. Forget the origin of blood. I wouldn't have sacrificed nearly as much as a mosquito to nourish eggs, see them hatch. I didn't, but would sharpen every blade needed to protect you. And also from Cemetery Ink, poem for my grandmother who passed away 4 years ago. And I returned to Romania for her funeral. So I'm reading this also for my aunt Hortanza. And I need to mention that I don't think this is a custom that's specific to Romanian culture. I believe it's fairly common, but we bury our dead in new shoes because they have a long journey. They have to cross 7 bridges and so on. The fortune teller. She stole the calling as a girl through a peephole into the healer's hut, then practiced on Florica, the cow with eyes like mine. Technique came later in a psych ward where, stunned by this unhinged stenographer's neck for decoding her sister's nocturnal gibberish, the director, a former patient, diagnosed her as prescient, and over pots of Turkish coffee, transferred techniques for which he, spirit deaf, had no use. Soon, her one-room flat replaced the town's confessional, its doorbell a 24/7 hope dispenser. Folk want someone to know their troubles so bad, she'd mutter. They're ready to trade their shoes for a bit of listening. I grew unashamed of hearing, accustomed to the blue-black flesh of midnight callers. This winter, same age as when she bartered her brokenness, I hold the rattled deck. We passed the dusk of my 46th birthday alone, she and I, in a chapel aglow with the agony of the damned, and angels alarmingly poker-faced. My galoshes, damp with transatlantic sweat, cling to the ice-clad floor. Just this one time, I promised myself as I shuffled the cards on her chest, and only to see if the cobbler will be there to resole her shoes. And this is the poem that ends the collection, Self as Goat in Tree. And it started as an infatuation with goats. I mean, I'm still very much in love with goats. And this calendars I've had for a number of years that show goats in argan trees. And then I started doing some research and learned quite a bit about the economics of argan oil, how it helps community, but how it's also very detrimental to all kind of things. And there are a number of concerns about forest sustainability, animal exploitation, and so on. I'm still in love, very much in love with goats. So here we go. Self as goat in tree. 9 goats scamper up the gnarly argan tree and graze it clean. They ingest the wrinkled fruit whole, though it's the bitter pulp alone that rouses their appetite for more. Sated, they stare at the horizon till branches wear thin and fall. Farmers harvest goats' droppings to extract the pit rich in kernels of oil. Haven't you too wished yourself a goat, perched punch drunk on a linden tree, blasé about the gold you might shit, how it might serve both hunger and greed? Haven't you goaded yourself to balance just a bit longer, chew on some fugitive scents, forget what a ditch the earth is? And the poem is dedicated to Gerald Stern. And I'm gonna read maybe just 2 more short poems that I've never read before. This is I would say a lyrical piece on grief and sex, the confluence of grief and sex, grief as sex, I don't know. It started as an ode to socks, to a pair of socks that I received as a gift, and went its own way. 2 words, the orgle, O-R-G-L-E here, is a guttural vocal sound produced by the male alpaca during copulation. And the orgling is supposed to induce ovulation in the female. And the kume is that throat singing practice by people in Mongolia, Siberia. And Chernowitz is a Romanian pronunciation of Chernowitz. These socks were woven by someone fallen out of love with poetry and in with the commune of alpacas. I read somewhere socks in bed calm amygdala and prefrontal cortex, improving orgasm, the body's assonance. But I know it is the handmaker's wound of devotion, the yarn's internal rhymes, interloop, snap, snap, that make our music, which is more like orgling than holy moaning, more like the kume of a lost shepherdess, or wind whistling through the half-open graves of Chernowitz. And one last poem. Michael and I have been writing a lot of death poems, premature elegies for ourselves and one another, each other. So this is a will of sorts. So Kiernan, Fabian, you're gonna be in trouble. It's a will hard to fulfill. And two words I need to mention: the conching and the tempering in the poem refer to the processes used in the making of chocolate. They help distribute evenly the cacao butter within chocolate, improve flavor, and do so many other things. By chocolate. I will die one day in this land, and you will fly back a single bar of me packed in dry ice. The airport dogs will sniff the carousel for traces of live matter, and the cacao nutty smell will send them whimpering. Make sure I'm conched right, neither too gritty nor too emulsified, tempered properly so I'm not laced in sugar bloom. My already departed will attend to the rest. For 7 years, on days of the dead, birthdays, anniversaries, drive your family to any cemetery gate to hand out dark assortments the children begged the night before. Keep the tradition, even if no one is ever waiting. If I'm lucky, they will say, Grandma overdosed on nibs. Say she got what she wanted, death by chocolate. They'll make myth of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. And it's so nice to know that there are people zooming in from Romania to hear the three of you read. That's wonderful. Now we have Michael Waters. He has published 13 books of poetry, most recently Caw from BOA Editions in 2020. Darling Vulgarity was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. And Parthenopi, New and Selected Poems from BOA Editions in 2001, was a finalist for the Paterson Poetry Prize. He has co-edited several anthologies, including Borderlines, Poems of Migration, Knopf 2020, Real Verse, Poems about the Movies, Contemporary American Poetry from Houghton Mifflin in 2006, and Perfect in Their Art, Poems on Boxing from Homer to Ali, Southern Illinois University Press. A 2017 Guggenheim Fellow, he has been the recipient of 5 Pushcart Prizes, fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, Fulbright Foundation, and the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. He's also received many residencies, including fellowships from Yaddo, MacDowell, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. At Caw's book's core is a sequence of 25 poems on aging, dementia, and caregiving, chiseled phrase by phrase toward unflinching and memorable closure. It is a brilliant, intimate, and moving addition to Waters' body of work, and may be his most powerful collection yet. Please help me welcome Michael Waters.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can you hear me now? Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to your new book of poems next year. And thank you, Sophia and Paula, for setting this up. Thank you, Dennis, for being with us tonight, and congratulations on your new and selected poems. And it's always a great pleasure to read with Mihaela. So thank you. Here's a new poem. Prayer with Caravaggio. I will no longer enter a cathedral unless it conceals a single Caravaggio in a recess reeking of incense where one bulb illuminates the oils that they may shine more darkly, that I might recognize the human flaws in divine depictions and weep with wonder. I'd rather stroll the local mall, the Galleria in Milan, where women burdened with bags stop to scratch with one foot the bull's huge balls for luck. That mosaic on the tiled floor snorts near sliding open doors, where summer's dense, ungodly heat hammers the falsely frigid air, while prayers exhaled for centuries from nearby pews and candled naves diminish in the vaulting. Here is my prayer, murmured over ice, shaved into a paper cup, euroed from a vendor at the bottom of these cathedral steps where I sprawl, syrup sweetening my tongue. I will no longer enter a cathedral, but wherever I go, I'll still pray with the sinful devotion of Caravaggio. Who paid his prostitute, robed in blue, to pose for a tableau as the poxed yet holy, a Virgin Mary. Let me rearrange myself here so that I can look at you. So let's see. I'll read a few poems from Caw, a book that BOA published in 2020 during the pandemic, of course. They did a beautiful job physically with the book. And this is a poem. The title of the poem is that of a recipe, revised and renamed by my wife, by Mihaela. It was renamed Good Riddance Chicken. My wife still cooks some meals using my ex-girlfriend's recipes, their familiar cursive once thrilling in those years of exchanging letters with their catalogs of arousal, divulging where we would taste each other on those weekends we managed to erase the distance between her home and mine, Maryland, Connecticut. I-95. Driving through downpour or snow, blasting cranberries or counting crows. She prepared exquisite meals, artichoke heart souffle or bass fillets poached with fennel for my midnight arrival, cuddled eggs with shallots for breakfast, then mailed the recipes so that I might, in her absence, recreate each savory morsel. Now my wife revises each directive, shunning grapes but adding orange wheels or switching shiitake for wild chanterelle, purring with Rihanna on the radio, crossing out the name of each dish at the top of the creased index card to substitute one of her own invention, but growing quiet when she reads again, looped at the bottom of her favorite recipe, the one for chilled Roquefort chicken, quote, always better when you add my company. So I'm going to read a few poems for and about my mother who died last month. She was 94 and deep into her Alzheimer's, and so it was not unexpected nor entirely unwelcome. Her ashes are on our kitchen counter as I speak right now. I should say that they're in a box on our kitchen counter. Here's a poem about her as a young woman. It's a new poem called Brooklyn Walk Up. Too often, my mother told the story of bundling me into the red snowsuit, leaving me scarved and ear-flapped, zippered to the chin, a baby bootied upon the quilted bed, while she wrestled the carriage 6 flights down tenement steps, only to return to a locked door, the key nestled in the handbag dangling from the inside hook. A cry like no other rose inside her. She rushed again down crooked stairs out onto Covert Street, past the deli and funeral parlor, all the way around the corner to the Irving Avenue alley, where she grasped, then climbed this new mother, the fire escape ladder, rung by icy rung to reach the first metal landing, then clanged upward floor by floor until, crouched upon the uppermost grate, she could see the swollen, immobile, doll-shaped pile. She raised the unclasped window, gathered me, grabbed her bag, descended once more the 6 floors to the cold carriage, then raced to the DeKalb Avenue BMT to meet my father home from work. Wheeled madly, I slept like a bobbing cork. She never told him how she shut me in, how she gazed through glass at the clump of cloth, the breathing heap of wool and cotton for which she leapt beyond her measure. Motherhood had turned uncommon. Years later, she took such pleasure in repeating the story. That boy, swathed like an Andean child, sacrificed on the mountain peak, mummified by the dry glacial winds, never to name his executioner. That boy, a favorite version of me. So in Claw, there's a sequence, a middle sequence of 25 poems that has to do with my mother's dementia, with her early life, poems that involve race and religion, as I grew up in Brooklyn with her, and then caregiving and forgiveness. And so I'll just read a few of these poems. They're fairly short. This is an early one in the sequence, Domestic Disturbance. I'm calling the police, she'd shriek, before my father gentled the phone from her fist. I'll break every dish in this house, she'd howl, shards pinwheeling hardwood floors. Face slapper, a spitball of spite, crying out at night, you never touch me. Why didn't my father pillow her mouth, burn down the house, a Chevrolet us away? How it wounds her now to revive the past. Mom, I prod, what else have you lost? It takes a while, or it took me a while, to recognize what was happening to her. This is called 20 Questions. What's that noise? Our neighbor's lawnmower. What's that noise? Someone's dog barking. What's that noise? Ice maker in the fridge. What's that noise? Lou Reed. What's that noise? Mom, why do you keep asking? Alice, back from the hospital, heard the chariot coming for to carry her home. This isn't a joke. The chariot full of angels, not choiring exactly, said it was less music than a rattling, like a spoon stuck in the garbage disposal, or quarters in the dryer, like wheels needing grease, or the angels coughing. Heard them under the anesthesia. Alice knows what she heard. What's that noise? Must be them angels. Always the funny man. Be quiet. Help me listen. They could be coming for you. My mom liked to watch reality shows. Some folks make over ramshackle Vicks. Eyesores transform into Danube palaces. Uncover Chagalls in storage garages. Sew gowns from garbage for Heidi Klum. One moron, naked in Peruvian jungle, gets stung on the dick by a wasp. Mom laughs. That straight guy given the queer eye, even he can see these actors don't fool anyone. You want reality? Remember Alice? Stick around for the memorial service. And this poem, the last I'll read from the sequence, appears near the end of the sequence. It's called Icon. When you tumble in the shower, I rush right over and praise whomever. No bones broken, only shaken, and you shrunken in your blue bathrobe. Aides and nurses wandering off to never-ending dismal duties. Neighbors too, to rehearse routine, unlovely idiosyncrasies. Slumped on the couch, you lean against me, then slowly unfold the crumpled parchment of your body to lie across my lap. If anyone returns, they'll see living sculpture, almost familiar, son and mother, perverse Pieta. So here's a new poem that comes out of this. Mihaela said that we've been writing pre-elegies for each other, for ourselves, for lots of friends, maybe even some of you out there. You'll find out eventually, or maybe you won't. But anyway, it's great to see so many of you there, and I'm so sorry we can't be in person with you. I miss so many of you. This is called Shark River Bridge. That spot in the center of the bridge where the seam splits metal, where the two leaves of the span part for tuna boats, their 7-foot rods rigged high as though trolling for God. That spot above the gray waters of the inlet while Avon by the sea arcs into Belmar, that's where I'll jump some wintry pre-dawn once dementia has commenced, before it seeps deeper into my brain and swerves me from my purpose, protects me from self-harm, makes my death dependent upon those whose love will stay their hand. I'll wear my black woolen overcoat, its pockets jangled with silverware, and wash down with a tumbler full of vodka the long amassed tablets of Ambien before leaping toward oblivion. Watching our elders deepen into dementia, we rehearse escapes, our exit fantasies. I will not gaze like my mother beyond the sun, who visits the memory care facility, will not pluck incessantly a ghost hair off my tongue, or spin and spin again the buttons of my cardigan, only to focus suddenly on his face and whisper, those glinting hooks descending, I want to kill you. No, I will not. I've picked my spot. So just two more. Here's what's strange, at least to me, although people have been telling me it's not uncommon. When my mom died, I wound up missing my father, who died 30 years ago. I've been thinking of him toward her death, and now really incessantly since her death. And so I wound up writing this poem, My Father's Comb. When my mother insisted that I take something, his 5-inch aluminum lifetime already outlined my back pocket. The comb I'd watched him ply how many thousand mornings to rake his hair straight back while I waited my turn before the bathroom mirror. I wielded a 39-cent Ace hard rubber with a dab of Brill cream to slick my mop before school, but for years now, I've run his comb as he did, under the cold water tap, then dragged across my scalp only the shorter tines of the guillotine-shaped tool of vanity and work ethic. Please take something, she'd said. My father 3 days dead, but I'd already nabbed the one object I knew I'd touch each day in such casual ritual to comb the grief away. And this last poem is for my daughter. It's called Morning Song, which is the title of a poem by Alan Dugan, and it ends with a phrase by Dugan. And again, thanks so much for being here tonight. I'm looking forward next to hear Dennis reading. Morning Song. When I delivered my daughter to the DMV, don't steer the car, I told her, be the car. And after she knocked over 6 red cones attempting to parallel park, she stormed back into the waiting room, sneering, be the car, be the car. All my life, I have given bad advice to those who matter most. Marry me, I told my girlfriend. Move closer, I urged my mother. Write what you know, I prodded my students. It won't kill you, I advised my late lover. And what I didn't tell anyone was worse. The silence offered to my father, the praise withheld from friends. And because when she was younger, I hadn't taught my daughter the meaning of the word aquarium. In her enthusiasm, she raced ahead to the next exhibit, then the next, only to slouch back slowly, head down, murmuring disappointment. More fish. More fish, I repeat to myself, sipping cold coffee before stepping outside, lips clamped shut into the daily accident. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was really wonderful to hear both of you reading together. What powerful poems about your mother and your father.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing them with us tonight. Dennis Nurkse is with us tonight to celebrate his new and selected poems. He is the author of 11 previous poetry collections, most recently Love in the Last Days, A Night in Brooklyn, The Border Kingdom, Burnt Island, and The Fall, all from Knopf. He is the recipient of a literature award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Guggenheim Fellowship in Poetry, 2 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships, 2 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowships, the Whiting Writers Award, among other honors. He served as Poet Laureate of Brooklyn from 1996 to 2001. His poems have been anthologized in 6 editions of the Best American Poetry series. He has also written on human rights and was elected to the board of Amnesty International USA for 2007 to 2010 term. He was a program officer for the Geneva-based NGO Defense for Children International from 1988 to 1992, and worked as a consultant for UNICEF. He has taught poetry at Rikers Island Correctional Facility, inner city literacy programs, and several MFA programs. He is currently a long-term faculty member at Sarah Lawrence College. Many of his students are here in the audience tonight. In an illuminating collection of selected poems over 35 years, one of our most essential American poets casts a clear eye on our politics, our places, and our heart's hidden stories. Ilya Kaminsky writes, "What a joy to have this overview of D. Nurkse's marvelous poems. He is a master of lyric mode, one in whose hands the lines come immediately alive. Magic breathes, nuance shimmers, and becomes the world all its own. See the doors open into the unknown, and we see that it is strangely familiar, because strangeness is, in fact, our first language, one we mouthed before words. Welcome to a country of strangers, reader. Don't be surprised if by the time you finish this terrific book, you might feel changed and at home. Please help me welcome D. Nurkse."
That's so kind of you, Jennifer. Wow, Jennifer Franklin is, whoop, am I unmuted? Can you guys hear me? Jennifer is one of those very rare people who's such a super serious poet and yet spends so much time helping other poets be known. That's a very rare quality. Jennifer Franklin, Martha Rose, you know, probably my editor, Deb Garrison, you know, there are few people who really, they write and they give everything to their writing, and then they give everything to other people also. You know, it's two sets of gifts. It's very moving, and we're looking forward to Jennifer's new book from Four Way. And such an honor to read with Michael and Mihaela. I love those poems, that poem about the father with the comb and Mihaela's poems. I'm going to start with some old poems and work to new poems. These are two very old poems at the beginning of this new and selected. Walking on the highway, freeway above Burlington, lights of a minor city, and north by Canada, no lights. Good luck is holy, and bad luck the last town with its rabbit coops and one boutique. I've been traveling 5 years. I still come to places seen in dreams, but not often. Lamps of a sawmill and a maple sugar shop. Almost dawn, no traffic, stars high and oblique. By my fruits I am known. This is a very early poem called Lamps and Fences. When the dead came into power, at first we did not notice. The stars were a little brighter. There were more roaches. Wherever we walked, we killed something. Since it was involuntary, it happened as if in secret. In the bars, the prices were written in chalk. The musicians were too eager to finish, though they remained true to the old rage. When we made love, our thoughts turned to the hunted, and those turned back from the frontier, though the frontier was only the meaning of a sound in a language that had mastered us. I want to read a few poems from my father, who died around this time of year in May. And this it's just very strange. I mean, there's a certain kind of, I was very close to my father. He died suddenly. And there was a strange sweetness to it. He had never been sick a day. He just left the world without suffering. But I don't know if that was the sweetness. I mean, it was very painful, and yet there was a beauty to the death, the time of year. My parents met on a boat out of Portugal in 1940. And I remember them now because they had seen their societies collapse. They didn't want to talk about it. So there was a lot that they didn't say. And as a little kid, I would pick up, people don't talk about the things that are really important, and behind the very everyday things that people say, there's another story. And it's a story about danger. It's a story about collapse. And that, something that comes back to me now, obviously, since 2016. The things that were so real in 1940 are real in our lives now. These are two poems for my father. Childhood and the great cities. In the dim room, my father unpacks his books and sets them on the dusty shelf in order of weight. Marx, the Bible, the Atlas. He runs a finger along his knife-edge crease and coaxes his trousers onto the clasp hanger. He will not wake me. These sheets are stiff from honeymoon come. I turn to face the wall. Lovers moan inside the plaster. Now my father lies beside me and clasps his hands over his pale belly. In case I can read his mind, he dreams in his own language. We are still in the middle of the journey from Alpha to Omega, Petersburg to Los Angeles, workers' state to kingdom of God. Each city is larger than the last, each room smaller, each keyhole more dazzling. I tiptoe to the curtain and see a general on a stone horse and moonlit slums, roofs crisscrossed by immense names, masked laundry, towers where every window is lit. After midnight, my father grunts softly, not to wake me. Soon he begins talking in the old language, haltingly at first, then in a flood as tears come back to him, and I'll sit cross-legged until dawn to guard him from that stranger with whom he bargains in a terrified voice. I felt very protective of my parents. My father was Estonian, and when I knew him, he was sort of a successful, self-conceived intellectual. He just had a BA, but he grew up in great poverty. I've gone back and seen where they lived in the basement. The family lived in the room of a basement of a manor house. This is a poem to my father as a revenant back from the dead. The bond. You were the only one in that room who was dead, the only one with no hope of return. And I gravitated to you, steadily negotiating brief conversations with the drunk sculptor and the exhausted dancer. But when I came into your presence, I was shy and chattered about my career and prospects, the vanities I'd hated in others. You were calm and thoughtful, peeling an orange as you listened, wincing as the acid bit under your nails, nodding eagerly when I paused. You deplored the great rains that had drowned the winter wheat. I countered with my list of sacrifices, as if I could bind you to life by suffering. And you frowned. You put your hand on mine. I could barely hear your answer. I had to read your lips with that music pounding in your ears and mine. But you comforted me, explaining the power of detachment. Lowering your eyes, you urged me to teach myself patience, to sleep more, to trade wine for milk, to take care when I left, given the lateness and the difficulty of knowing who rules these half-lit streets. And now I'm going to read some more contemporary poems about this side of the 1940 to 2022 dialogue. This is a poem in the George Floyd moment, and it's so strange that it was a moment and yet it still exists. You know, I had a student, Quincy Scott Jones, who, young Black man, he wrote about police violence. He wrote a great book called How to Kill Yourself Instead of Your Children, and he had internalized Trayvon Martin. And then having internalized it, he had to live with seeing it happen over and over again. You know, he had created his own knowledge, his point of view, acted, taken responsibility, put the word in the world, and then just witness more of his brothers dying and have that feeling, that strange feeling of being inauthentic because you're still alive, because you didn't die. It's a poem called Order to Disperse. Tonight, my children are facing live ammunition. One holds a rock, one brought a Bible, one hides a phone. The fires of the provocateurs burn so brightly. The police put duct tape over their badges. The soldiers are hooded. They wear no insignia. Last night they had rubber bullets. Tonight, hollow point. In the smoke, you see the outlines of a bank, a cathedral. Absent is the profiles of presidents on coins. A voice advances, a voice retreats, someone aims. Have you ever died in a dream? What happened then? Tell me what happened. There is only one life. Why do I hold mine like water in cupped hands? You know, I don't know that for sure, that there's only one life, but I wrote that in the poem, and it's possible that it's true. This is a prose poem called The Screen. And this is, in the poem, is to my mother, but it's actually to my grandmother. I mean, my grandmother, my mother-in-law. She would be furious. She died since I wrote this. Helene Cooper. And she was a civil rights person. She was at Freedom Summer in Mississippi in maybe 1964. But this is an occasion you can recognize, again, a prose poem. I invited my mother to visit and watch a woman being elected president. We sat in front of cable news. I swear, we each thought of holding hands. After 20 minutes, we began to fidget. She excused herself to the bathroom. I chose to take a call. I buried my eyes in my cell. Our city had grown so silent. Where were the ambulances, the low-flying jets? A car passed with the rattle of a loose fan belt. A child cried in the next building. I have to go, my mother said suddenly, home to feed my Maltese. I helped her into her coat and found her gloves. We hugged a little stiffly. I heard her steps diminish in the corridor. I was left facing the screen. I tore myself away and followed her. She's old, old. I rode the next subway down. Were our streets ever so dark? The lamps were shining with a prissy glow that disclosed nothing, that smudged whatever it touched. But I saw a silhouette with her adamant shuffle and followed it into the cold. I watched from a block away as she hailed a cab, clambered in gimpily, lit a cigarette, and began chatting. The car sped away toward Queens. So it's long ago, I thought. She can smoke and flirt. Perhaps I am not even born yet. And I began walking endlessly in our vast city. Doors flew open, and the faces there were the children who died in Birmingham, in Lowndes County, and Neshoba. But the high windows were blank and pulsed with a shuddering blue light. This is a poem from Rikers Island, and sort of didn't want to write a lot of poems about Rikers Island. This poem is called The White Prisons. The kids ask, do you also teach in the white prisons? There are white schools, white libraries, white hospitals, churches, parks, and ball fields. Why wouldn't there be white prisons? Snow pulses in a tiny barred window, an idea at once vague and obsessive. The kids have been writing their poem. It starts with a blank page, a doodle in the margin, but soon you are a child in the streets. Oily slush seeps up through the soles of your Nikes. You pass a Burger King, Zion Redeemer, the ironworks under sleet. Pitkin Avenue does not go all the way to morning. The white Lexus appears out of nowhere. Where to run? Icy stoops, steel shod doors. I expect to live another 3 years, probably 2 and 6 weeks, 6 weeks and 7 days, probably to my 19th birthday. It happens every night in my mind. The long street, the hour before dawn, the white Lexus, my enemy's face in the tinted window, so familiar, so masked. Yeah, these kids all had their death date in their minds, I mean, and it would be a few years away or a few days away. I mean, there's a sense where we all do, but I think they didn't believe anything else was possible, There was also, poetry is not something that takes place in MFA programs. I remember a conversation in Rikers Island where one prisoner says, I woke up at 4 a.m. to write a poem, but of course I couldn't write it because I can't turn on the light because then the guard will come running, but I thought about it. They were in a dormitory and the kids, they're just kids. And another prisoner said, me too, except I woke up at 3 a.m. and another prisoner said, yeah, I did too. You couldn't really make this up, but there were 4 prisoners who had woken up in the night with a poem, and none of them conceived of themselves as poets. And probably all of them thought that poetry was something that they did in secret. I'm going to read a poem to my daughter. This poem is called Showers. I was telling people this story. My daughter was a very bossy little girl, and it's an early memory of just language, of just chilling in a backyard in Brooklyn, and there's music playing, and I have to dig it because on Saturday afternoon, you can't complain about people's music. People have the inflatable round pools, and they have pool boxes. And my daughter marched out and said, she's about 3, and she said, "Don't tap your foot, Daddy. It's not your music." And she's a little louder in this poem, a little older in this poem. Showers. The child tells me, put a brick in the toilet, don't wear leather, don't eat brisket, snapper, or farmed salmon. Not tells, orders. Doesn't she know the sluice gates were left open and 1 trillion gallons wasted just for the dare of it? Until the staring eye shares that thrill, confessing, I am just iris and cornea, blind spot where brain meets mind, the place where the image forms itself from a spark, image of the coming storm. But the child waits outside the bathroom with the watch she got for best diorama, muttering, 2 minutes too long. Half measures, I say. She says, action, I'm one man. She says, 7 billion. If you choose, the sea goes back. And I'm going to read 2 more poems. This is a love poem, Ischia. That city was a game we played against each other with a mirror, a dusty bottle of Prosecco, various empty shoes of different sizes, a sliver of Mediterranean in an incised window. The object was to lose ignominiously, and we allowed ourselves various extraneous elements, the fly, an extremely faint marching band, nakedness, a mole, paradise, suffering, time. We would begin at twilight and end at sunrise. To the loser, Ischia would be a memory. To the winner, a conquest to be administered. If it was a draw, we would just listen, arm in arm, to the great bells booming, thrumming, the ropes creaking, triumphant and still powerless before the inhuman weakness of dawn. And the last poem is called A Clearing on Ruth Island. It's a prose poem. The child sees the firefly far off in the birches. It's very late. I did not expect another summer, another child. So much darkness. She trots away to catch it. Possibly 9 minutes later, she lopes back, barely winded. There is the light in her cupped hands. She shows it off. Look how it flashes. She will pass it to me. I can feel the little wind and the adamant wing against my palms. My life is almost over. I pass it back. She waves it up dramatically. We watch for a greenish spark. If the night is clear and we can stare up for a full minute, we are guaranteed to see a satellite, a star whose name I know. There are only 5, a glittering meteor, a comet, or the glint of a plane headed to the Arctic. Those towering ghostly shapes must be the huge, unmoving cumulus of late summer, the clouds Jesus referred to when he said, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. Those close, low, humpbacked shapes must be the fishermen's boats, hauled high and tarped. No lamps on the island. What light there is seems to come from under our sneakers. Now the fireflies are pulsing in phase. You could parse it out. like the meter of a fugue. The plan is obvious. Earth will become more and more beautiful until I can't stand it. Then I will vanish. It will be in my mind that the skiffs are hauled up, safe from the wild tide. In my mind that the sleepless, silly accordion plays sweet Lorraine, over sweet across deep water. I can't see the child, but she takes my pinky almost angrily. She will lead me back to Schofield, counting our steps on the dark path. When we come to 1,000,000, we will be home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. That was really amazing. What a wonderful reading tonight from all of you. I think that in light of everything that's going on in the world this week, instead of asking our normal question first, we will ask the three of you, since you're so concerned with poems of social justice, what can we do as poets to help the arrow of justice move in the right direction?
Well, if I could answer, I think there's a huge amount that you can do. You know, I mean, Nixon was driven crazy by one person who stubbornly protested outside the White House during the war in Vietnam, and that one particular person was just totally on Nixon's mind. There are just many, many cases of just popular pressure changes people's minds. It's a letter, and we live in a democracy. There are other cultures where people go behind bars for 30 years to write that letter, but we can write it. So I would say there's a huge amount of things that we can do. You know, I mean, one individual, you can't make the world safe, but you can do something to make the world safe. And we wouldn't want a world where one individual had absolute power. And, you know, if just talking about programs, I mean, people like Partners in Health, you know, doing an enormous amount for Haiti is a crisis people have stopped talking about, but it was a crisis shortly a little while ago, and they just do such huge specific work there, save so many lives. Partners in Health, Paul Farmer just died recently, but the organization is very strong. And another thing that I'm going to say, and then I'll shut up, is that I do think poetry is very important, and poetry, even without an agenda, you know, we just don't know ourselves as a species, and it's very important to have that freedom to create a decoy self and just try and figure out who we are and why we live in a world where aging males have the power to destroy every cricket and sparrow. Why did we choose this?
I would, thank you, Dennis. I would add that I grew up in a totalitarian regime, and poets, writers in general, but poets even more than writers in general, were really the conscience and the soul and sort of the lifeline in terms of hope. And they didn't have to write optimistic poetry or hopeful poetry, but to kind of keep us on our toes and provide nuance and create sort of even parallel universes that helped us survive in many ways, emotionally, spiritually, but sometimes physically survive. You know, you couldn't find food, but you had Ana Blandian's or Mircea Dinescu's or one of the Samizdat underground poets' work that could keep you hoping that things were going to change. So I didn't start writing until I came to the United States in my mid-30s, but I always knew that poetry and especially, you know, I think poetry that it's written out of a sense of necessity, not because you want to be a poet, but because you believe in the power of poetry, you believe that it can make a difference, even in a few people's lives. That's why I started writing, and so yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
And not only necessity, but out of our helplessness, because I feel what else can I do? And each of us has to lift our voices in some way or other, it seems. So much more is coming down the pike right now, isn't it? That's horrifying, and it's not a time, I guess, for us to be quiet.
Thank you for those answers. We got a question from Michael Quattrone, who asks Dennis, and I want to extend the question to all three poets. How do you write your poems? Do you write one line at a time, one sentence at a time, one image at a time, or some other way entirely?
I don't really know. I mean, it kind of starts writing something on an envelope, and then, there's a thing in Nadezhda Mandelstam, her memoir, Hope Against Hope, where, I mean, this has nothing to do with me, but her husband, Osip Mandelstam, is this great poet, and she's his caretaker, and she ends up writing one of the greatest works of literature about being his caretaker. But having said that, somebody comes into their entourage and she feels he must be from the secret police, because like, he's a poet, he sits down and with a notebook at a desk and writes in the notebook at a desk every day. And Nadezhda Mandelstam says everybody knows a poet just walks around talking to themselves, And I think you kind of talk to yourself and then you revise like a maniac. Maybe other people have more coherent answers.
Mihaela?
You go first.
All right. No, I did that walk today along the boardwalk from Asbury Park into Belmar. And for some reason I carry a notebook with me. And for some reason I thought of something that happened to me back in Athens, Greece in 1982, and began writing some notes in my notebook, and it'll wind up turning into a poem at some point, I think. But in terms of a question of craft, which maybe that question is, for me, when I'm involved in the poem, I stay with the poem. I've said before, I always write just a single poem at a time. I never have a series of drafts that I can go back and forth to, and I always envy those poets who do, but I just have my one poem that I'm working on day after day after day. And I tend to write line by line, and I tend to revise as the poem takes shape. And I've never been able to work in any other way, though I've tried sometimes. And so, we do, the poem lets us know how it wants to be written, and I'm supposed to follow that, I guess, for as long as I can, and then see what happens to it. So I wind up eventually either getting rid of the poem or keeping it. So.
And I would say it varies from poem to poem. I read some of the shortest, poems. Some of them come out of research. Some of them come out of memory or experience, and the process is different. I think every time. I used to write one poem at a time. Now I have early drafts of various poems that I carry with me one at a time, and use whatever 5 minutes I have to just look at it. Sometimes change nothing, sometimes change a line break. And so it really varies.
Thank you so much for those answers to that question.
Can I add something just very quickly?
Yes, please.
That poems get written because we read other poems, and how crucial it is to read the poems of others and to articulate to yourself why you like something or why you don't like something too. And I think poems come out of gathering as many voices as you can into yourself and your voice will somehow come out of that.
That's a great thought. And maybe the thought there too is that with reading other poets and with revision, poetry, I hate to have shoulds, but maybe it kind of works best when it's dialogic. You're talking back to your prior self who wrote the poem, and you're talking to all the other poets that you love.
Along those lines, what advice would you give? I know you're all professors, and we have a lot of students at the Hudson Valley Writers Center who are at various ages working on their first full-length poetry collections. What advice would you give to those people while they're putting together their collections and revising them?
I can start. For me, it's very easy. Just read, and it builds on what Dennis and Michael just said. Read other people's work. I mean, that's going to be, you're working on your own manuscript. Make a pile of 20 books, of poetry, and just read through them. And I think something will happen. You'll see your own work with different eyes. You'll see what's possible. I truly believe that that's the one thing that can make us better writers, reading other people's work, or at least that's what I feel. That's the only thing that's going to move me forward.
And I would add to that poems are written in revision, and so stay with the poems. Don't think that they're finished yet. Don't move on too soon. And the other thing I would say is always make it hard for yourself. I always keep Randall Jarrell in mind, who said, "If I can think of it, it's not what I want."
Yeah, I might say the opposite of that, which would be cool, is that like try and make writing an ecstatic activity. You know what I mean? Like chase the poem the way my Springer Spaniel chases a squirrel, because it's tough out there, and it's sort of, the world doesn't care whether writing your poems was ecstatic or whether it was miserable. But that's just my own feeling. And I would say, remember, I'm going to butcher this quote, but James Baldwin said, "Through books, I learned that the things I thought most isolated me were actually what most connected me to everyone else on earth, living and dead." And he was talking about all races and also the dead also. And I mean, that's the thought, that the things that you feel nobody else can get, maybe the things that actually everybody else is going to get and you're going to discover.
Sophia, do we have another question from our audience members in the chat?
Well, I know that we just had a question about what advice the poets would give to students who are putting together a collection for the first time. We also got another question asking for a little bit more information about your own particular process of putting together a collection. Do you wait until you have a critical mass of work and then try to discern whether there is connective tissue? Or do you begin a series or collection consciously, deliberately, or somewhere in between?
Who'd like to start on this one? Go ahead.
A little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of both. I know Alicia, the amazing poet Alicia Ostreicher is here. I don't know if she's still here. I think so. But I remember when I put my first collection together, the first manuscript after the MFA, and Alicia was my mentor, and she read it and she said, "Where are your American poems? It's all about your life in Romania." And I wrote a poem in response to that. So I felt I couldn't have the manuscript of poem, and a poem was actually a direct response to her question. I'm answering Alicia's question, why I don't have any poems about my life in America. I'd been here for 10 years. So, and then I ended up writing another couple of poems that I thought needed to be part of the manuscript. But then with the other two collections, especially the last two, I actually trusted other poets, poet friends who have a better eye than I do toward that, to look at poems and see if they worked together into a manuscript. I did not see any connections. I thought I was writing about a million different things that I had absolutely, there's absolutely no connective tissue there. So I could not put together my own manuscript. So just, yeah, I don't know, Michael, Dennis.
For me, I mean, I'm writing poems, and then I start to notice that the poems are starting to speak with each other. And that's when I think a collection is starting to take shape. And I say a collection, but I don't think a book should be a collection. I think it should be a book. I think there should be some sort of, organic quality to the way the book holds together. And so I like the way the poems not only speak to each other, but the way they start to enhance each other. And I think the arrangement of the poems is so crucial to any book. And that for me is one of the hardest things to do. I mean, I really sort of dread putting a book together. I wind up putting all the poems out on the floor and keep shuffling them around. And there are certain people like Mihaela who help me do that then. But I do think in the end that arrangement is absolutely crucial. And the way that those poems respond to each other and help each other to breathe, I think that's what a collection or what a book of poems needs to do.
Yeah, I agree with Michael. You really want a book to be a thematic, a living organism, not just 60 poems. And it is very difficult because sometimes you're using a different part of the brain. You're not using an intuitive part of the brain. You're using an organizational part of the brain. And some poems want to be thematic, and sometimes being too thematic is a carapace for the poem. So it's very often, like, I think everything else to me in the art form is, so much of it is trial and error. Try something out and hope it works. It's quite solitary for me too.
Dennis, do you find that the more, as I do, the more I learn about poetry, the more I learn about craft, the harder it becomes to make a poem?
Well, for that, there are like ways, I mean, I think that's kind of true. Or maybe it's another way for me is that, like, when I was a kid, I had the power of ignorance, I mean, not just in poetry. I thought I could write a poem. I thought I could play jazz like Sonny Stitt. I mean, I had so many delusions that I wish I had now. That's that song, like, wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then.
Well, thank you all so much for reading your wonderful work. What a trio. It was such a treat to hear all of you. And you've been such a wonderful audience. We have so many amazing poets in the audience tonight. It's so great to see all of you here. Please join us as we welcome Claudia Rankin on May 25th on Zoom. And please come see us at the center on June 1st. And sometimes in the summer, we're going to have some live readings. So please check out our schedule. Dennis will be teaching for us in October, and maybe I can persuade the two of you and Sharon Olds in the audience to come read for us or teach for us soon too. Thank you all for being here. We are saving the chat and we're going to send it to you so you can see what all of your fans have been writing about your poems tonight. Thank you for your work. It means a lot.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope we all stay in touch, friends in the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hope to see you all in real life sometime soon.